The instructors bet she would collapse in 10 minutes because no species that needs oxygen every second survives this course. Commander Vrel leaned back in his chair. All four of his arms crossed in what anyone who knew Craxians would recognize as profound skepticism. His scales shimmered under the harsh lighting of the instructor's lounge, catching every shade of doubt he was feeling. Across from him, senior trainer Koth was busy pouring himself another cup of something that smelled like burnt rubber mixed with engine coolant, which for a Thorian was apparently considered a delicacy. "So," Vrel began, his voice dripping with amusement, "let me get this straight. Command actually approved a human for the advanced endurance program." Koth's three eyes blinked in sequence, left to right, the way they always did when he was trying not to laugh. "Oh, it gets better. She specifically requested the high-altitude course. The one designed for Valthine cadets. The Valthine. You mean the species with 3 sets of lungs and blood that's practically pure oxygen carriers?" "The very same." Vrel's mandibles clicked together, which was the Craxian equivalent of a snort. "And she knows this, I assume? Someone told her what she was signing up for?" "Apparently she read the entire course manual. All 2,000 pages. Then she asked if there were any additional challenges she should prepare for." Koth took a long sip of his toxic beverage, savoring the moment. The administrator thought she was joking. "Humans," Vrel muttered, shaking his largest head while his smaller secondary one just looked annoyed. "They show up to the galactic community 50 years ago, barely capable of leaving their own star system, and suddenly they think they can compete with species that have been doing this for millennia. It's almost adorable. Like watching a flimbic trying to fly before its wings have grown in." Koth set down his cup with a metallic clink. "So, since you're so confident, how about we make this interesting?" "Oh, I'm listening." "I say she doesn't make it past the first oxygen reduction zone. That's what, maybe 15 minutes into the course. She'll tap out before her lips even turn blue. Or whatever color human lips turn when they're oxygen deprived." Vrel's scales rippled with what could only be described as glee. "You're being generous, Koth. Too generous. I'll take that bet and raise you. She doesn't make it past the initial ascent, 10 minutes. Maximum. Maybe 8. 200 credits, make it 500. I've seen her file. 0.7 standard gravity on her homeworld. 21% oxygen in the atmosphere. 21%. Do you know what we're running the course at? 9% at the start, dropping to 4 by the summit. Exactly. She's going to walk in there, take one breath and immediately regret every life choice that brought her to this moment." Vrel extended his primary right arm. 500 credits. Says she's in the medical bay before the first checkpoint, wondering why she ever left her cozy little oxygen-rich planet. Koth gripped Vrel's hand with his massive claw, sealing the wager. "You're on. Though I almost feel bad taking your money, please. The only thing you should feel bad about is not betting more." Neither of them could have known just how wrong they were about to be. Lieutenant Jade Reeves walked into the preparation facility at exactly 0600 hours, which was apparently a thing humans cared about. Punctuality. As if showing up on time would somehow compensate for showing up with the galaxy's worst respiratory system. Vrel watched her from the observation deck, his datapad already pulling up her biological specs, and honestly the numbers just kept getting worse the more he looked at them. Height: 1.7 meters. Weight: 68 kilograms. Bone density: laughably low compared to any species with sense. And that cardiovascular system, oh, that was the real comedy show right there. "Look at her," he muttered to Koth, who had joined him at the window. "She's just walking around, breathing. Like she doesn't have a care in the world." "Maybe she doesn't understand what she's signed up for," Koth offered, though even he sounded doubtful. Jade had dark hair pulled back into something humans called a bun, tight enough that Vrel wondered if it was cutting off circulation to her brain, which might actually explain her presence here. Her skin was this bizarre shade of brown that seemed to change in different lighting, nothing like the consistent scale patterns or chitin plating that proper species had, and her eyes, 2 of them, just 2, were scanning the room with an expression that Vrel's translator kept unhelpfully labeling as determined. She wore the standard-issue training suit, which on her looked about as protective as tissue paper. No natural armor plating, no reinforced skeletal structure visible through the suit's biomonitors. No secondary organs, just this soft, squishy arrangement of vital parts that seemed designed specifically to fail under pressure. Her oxygen saturation is at 98%, Koth read from his own datapad, sounding almost offended. That's it. That's all her blood can carry. 98% in full atmospheric conditions. My species maintains 140% at rest, and she needs continuous oxygen intake, Vrel added, pulling up another chart. Continuous. She stops breathing for, what does this say, 4 minutes? Maybe 6 if she's trained. And her brain starts dying. Actual cellular death. That can't be right.
Oh.
It's right. I double-checked with the medical database. Humans are essentially running on a timer from the moment they exit the womb. Stop the oxygen, even briefly, and critical systems start shutting down. Rel zoomed in on her cardiovascular readout. And get this, she only has one heart. One. Singular. If it stops, she just dies. No backup. No redundancy. Just, oops, heart stopped. Time to become a corpse. Jade was doing stretches now, bending and twisting in ways that looked physically improbable for someone without an exoskeleton. She caught sight of the observation window, seemed to know exactly where the instructors were standing, despite the one-way glass, and had the absolute audacity to smile and wave. She's mocking us, Koth said flatly. She's about to learn a very expensive lesson about hubris, Rel replied, checking his credit balance one more time. A very, very expensive lesson. The Galactic Military Academy's high-altitude endurance course had a nickname among the cadets. Though most were too terrified to say it out loud, they called it the Suffocator. Not particularly creative, sure, but accuracy counted for something. The course had been designed by a committee of Vulthine engineers who apparently woke up one day and decided that regular military training was far too easy, too comfortable, too likely to produce soldiers who might actually survive combat. So they built 12 kilometers of pure atmospheric nightmare, stretched across a vertical climb that would make most mountains look like gentle hills. Let me paint you a picture, Rel said, pulling up the holo display for what he told himself was definitely the last time, but probably wasn't. Stage 1, the ascent. 4 kilometers straight up a 60-degree incline with oxygen levels dropping every 500 meters, starts at 9%, which is already barely breathable for most species. By the time you hit the 2-kilometer mark, you're down to 6%. Koth nodded, his eyes tracking the glowing path on the display. And that's where most Thorian cadets start using supplemental oxygen. Not that we need it, mind you, but protocol suggests it's, smart. Smart, yes. A concept our human friend seems unfamiliar with. Rel'll swiped to the next section. Stage 2, the traverse. 3 kilometers across an exposed ridge where wind speeds regularly hit 80 kilometers per hour, oxygen holding steady at 5%, temperature dropping to minus 20 degrees. Oh, and did I mention the gravity plates are set to 1.4 standard? I trained on that section last year. Lost 2 claws to frostbite. You have 12 claws, Koth. You could afford it. Vrel zoomed in on the final section, and even he had to admit it looked properly horrific. Stage 3. The summit push. 5 kilometers of mixed terrain, technical climbing sections, obstacle arrays, the works. Oxygen drops to 4%. Then 3. The final kilometer sits at 2.5% oxygen, which is coincidentally the same atmospheric composition found on dead worlds. The hologram rotated, showing elevation charts, failure points, and little red markers indicating where cadets had needed emergency extraction over the past decade. There were a lot of red markers, an uncomfortable number of red markers. Actual statistics, Koth said, pulling up his own data. Out of 473 attempts over the last 10 years, only 62 cadets have completed the course without supplemental oxygen. That's a 13% success rate. And every single one of those 62, Vrel highlighted their species classifications. Vulthine, obviously. Crithari, who have those ridiculous diffusion membranes, and exactly one Thorian, which I'm guessing was you showing off. It was character building. It was stupid. Vrel cleared the display, but here's my favorite part. You know what the medical bay record is for fastest course failure? Enlighten me. 3 minutes, 42 seconds. A Glimmick cadet made it exactly 700 meters before his respiratory system just said no thanks and shut down completely. He survived, barely, but he never came back to the academy. Last I heard, he's working in agricultural distribution on some backwater colony, probably having flashbacks every time he climbs a staircase. Koth's mandibles twitched. And the course has a 94% injury rate for first-time attempts. 94%. Broken bones, respiratory trauma, hypothermia, altitude sickness so severe it causes permanent neurological damage. One cadet hallucinated so badly he tried to fight his own shadow. Rel closed his datapad with a satisfying click. And Command thinks a human, a species that gets winded climbing 2 flights of stairs, is going to what exactly? Stroll through it. She's going to die. Koth said simply. She's not going to die. We have excellent medical teams, but she is absolutely without question going to fail. The equipment staging area had filled up with spectators, because apparently word had spread faster than a hull breach about the human attempting to Shopakatar. Cadets from 6 different species lined the observation platforms, their translators buzzing with what Vrel's audio pickups were registering as variations of laughter, disbelief and something his system labeled as second-hand embarrassment. A Vulthine cadet, massive and blue-skinned with air sacs visibly pulsing along his neck, leaned over the railing. Hey, human! You know they have beginner courses, right? Like courses designed for species that actually need to breathe regularly. His friends erupted in that weird hooting sound Vulthine made when they found something hilarious. Jade looked up from checking her boots, gave him a thumbs up, which apparently meant something positive in human gesture language, and went right back to her preparations. She doesn't even understand she's being insulted, another instructor muttered. A Krathari female whose translator chips were blinking rapidly. Is this a human thing? Do they not process social hierarchies? Maybe her brain is already oxygen deprived, someone else offered, which got another round of laughter. Vrel watched Jade's bio readings on his display. Heart rate steady at 62 beats per minute. Respiratory rate, normal. Stress hormones, barely elevated. Either she was too stupid to understand the danger, or she had the emotional range of a cargo container. Neither option suggested she'd last long on the course. Koth appeared at his elbow, looking far too pleased with himself. I just talked to Instructor Ralix. He wants in on the bet. He's giving her 20 minutes, thinks she'll make it to the first checkpoint before the medical team has to scrape her off the mountain. 20 minutes? He's delusional. Rel pulled up his credit account again. You know what, I'm doubling my bet. 1,000 credits says she's done in under 10 minutes. I'm talking full respiratory failure, emergency oxygen deployment, the whole dramatic rescue. You're that confident, Koth? Look at her. Rel gestured at the viewing screen where Jade was now doing something called jumping jacks, which appeared to be a method of looking ridiculous while standing in place. She weighs less than my left leg. She has the lung capacity of a small child by galactic standards, and she's about to attempt a course that has broken trained soldiers from species literally bred for low oxygen environments. A Glinic cadet whispered loud enough for his translator to pick up. I give her 5 minutes before she's crying for her habitat module. Jade glanced up one more time, and this time, instead of smiling, she winked. Actually winked at the observation deck, like this was all some sort of entertaining game instead of a potential death sentence. Make it 1,500 credits, Rel said. She's going to fail spectacularly, and I want to profit appropriately from the lesson she's about to learn. The starting horn blared at 0630, and Jade Reeves stepped onto the course like she was going for a morning stroll instead of attempting something that had hospitalized dozens of cadets who were objectively, biologically, measurably better equipped for this than she was. Rel had his datapad in 2 hands, biomonitor in another, and his 4th hand was already hovering over the emergency extraction button because someone responsible had to be ready to save this foolish human from herself. Oxygen saturation, 98%. The medical tech announced over the comm system. Heart rate increasing to 85. Respiratory rate, 18 breaths per minute. All within expected parameters for initial exertion. Just wait, Vrel muttered. 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Then we'll see those numbers drop like a cargo freighter with failed engines. Jade hit the first incline, a relatively gentle 30-degree slope that served as the course's way of saying hello before it really got serious. The oxygen mix in this section had already dropped to 8%. Most species would be feeling it by now. That little tickle in the lungs that suggested maybe breathing was about to become more of a chore than usual. She kept running, not jogging, not struggling, running with a steady rhythm that looked almost mechanical. Heart rate 92, the tech called out. Oxygen saturation 96%, minor decrease, well within acceptable range. Koth's three eyes narrowed in sequence. Hold on. That's normal. That's a completely normal decrease for initial altitude adjustment. It's a fluke, Rel said. But his scales were doing that thing where they flattened slightly, which happened when he was less certain than he wanted to admit. The real test is coming up. The first oxygen reduction zone. That's at the 500-meter mark. She'll hit it in what? Another minute? 45 seconds at her current pace. The observation deck had gone quieter than Vrellet had ever heard it. Every cadet, every instructor, every being with functioning optical organs was watching the small human figure making steady progress up the incline. Her breathing was visible on the thermal imaging. Regular puffs of condensation in the cooling air. Nothing erratic, nothing panicked. She crossed the 500-meter marker. The atmospheric processors kicked in with an audible hum, dropping the oxygen mix to 7%. Now, Vrel said. Now she'll slow down. She has to slow down. Jade's pace didn't change. If anything, she seemed to lean into the incline, her stride lengthening slightly. Oxygen saturation holding at 94%, the medical tech reported. And was that confusion in her voice? Heart rate, 105. Elevated but stable. Respiratory rate, 22 breaths per minute. She's compensating appropriately. Appropriately? Rel's voice cracked slightly. She's a human. She shouldn't be capable of appropriate compensation. Her species needs oxygen the way starships need fuel. The comm system crackled to life. It was Instructor Ralex, stationed at Checkpoint 1, located at the 1-kilometer mark. Command? You seeing what I'm seeing on approach monitors? We see it, Ralex. The human is... She's maintaining pace. Actually, correction. She just accelerated slightly. Current oxygen level at her position is 6.2%. Her bio readings show... Hang on, this can't be right. What can't be right? Rel demanded. Her oxygen saturation dropped to 91%, held there for approximately 30 seconds, and now it's climbing back up. 92%. She's adapting in real time. Koth set down his cup of terrible beverage. Humans can do that. Apparently this one can, Ralax responded. She just passed Checkpoint 1. Time, 8 minutes, 14 seconds. That's actually faster than the Voltine cadet who ran this course last month. The observation deck erupted in confused chatter. Translators were working overtime trying to keep up with the dozen different languages, all expressing variations of what the hell and how is this possible, and did anyone actually read the human biology files completely? Jade hit the 1.5-kilometer mark, where the oxygen sat at a suffocating 5.5%. She was still running. Her face had taken on a reddish tint. Sweat was visible on her skin, and her breathing had definitely increased, but she wasn't stopping. Wasn't even slowing down. Rel checked the clock. 12 minutes. She'd been on the course for 12 minutes, and not only had she not collapsed, she was ahead of pace. This is wrong, he said to nobody in particular. This is all wrong. The traverse section started at the 3-kilometer mark, and this was where the course stopped pretending to be merely difficult and started actively trying to kill you. The oxygen level dropped to 4.5%, the temperature plummeted to -15 degrees, and the wind generators kicked on with enough force to physically shove cadets sideways off the narrow ridge path. Rel had given up on looking confident. His scales were doing full anxiety ripples now, and he'd stopped bothering to hide it. Medical team, confirm ready status, he barked into the comm. Medical team Alpha, standing by at Checkpoint 3, came the response. Medical team Beta, positioned at the halfway extraction point. We have full emergency oxygen, thermal units, and rapid response aircraft on standby. She's going to need all of it, Rel muttered, watching Jade approach the entrance to the traverse. This is it. This is where basic biology catches up with stubborn human determination. Jade paused at the threshold, and for a moment, just a brief moment, Rel felt a surge of vindication. See, she was stopping. She was finally recognizing the absolute insanity of what she was attempting. Then she took a drink from her water supply, rolled her shoulders in a way that looked almost casual, and stepped onto the exposed ridge. The wind hit her immediately, a cross-current designed to test balance and core strength. She staggered, caught herself, and kept moving forward. The biomonitors went chaotic for a few seconds as her body registered the temperature drop and the oxygen decrease. Oxygen saturation, 89%, the medical tech called out, and her voice had gone tight. That's below safe operational levels for humans. Heart rate, 132. Respiratory rate, 30 breaths per minute. She's in respiratory distress. Pull her out, Koth said. Vrelo. Call it. She's done. But Vrel was watching something on his display, something that didn't make sense. Wait. Her oxygen saturation just ticked up. 90%. How did it tick up? The oxygen level is still dropping in her sector. Jade was moving along the ridge now, slower than before, definitely laboring, but moving with purpose. Her hands were gripping the safety cable, her legs were shaking visibly on the thermal imaging, and her face had gone from red to an alarming pale color that the database unhelpfully labeled as shock precursor warning. But she wasn't stopping. Checkpoint 3, this is command, Vrel said, his voice strained. What's your visual on the human? Instructor Ralax came back on comm, and he sounded absolutely baffled. She's okay, she's struggling, clearly struggling. But she's managing the wind compensations, maintaining safety protocol contact with the cable, and, wait, she just navigated the narrow section. You know, the part that's only half a meter wide. She did it without hesitation. Her oxygen levels, holding at 90%. I don't understand it either, Commander. By every metric we have, she should be unconscious right now. Her brain should be screaming for oxygen that isn't there. But she's just pushing through it. The Krathari instructor who'd been watching from the observation deck spoke up, her voice careful. Commander, I've been reviewing human evolutionary biology. It says here that humans evolved as persistence hunters. They would chase prey for hours, sometimes days, until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. So what? Vrel snapped. So maybe we've been thinking about this wrong. We've been assuming humans are fragile because they need constant oxygen. But what if that's not a weakness? What if their entire physiology is built around maximizing efficiency with minimal resources? Jade cleared the traverse. 2.8 kilometers down, 9.2 to go. The oxygen at her current position was 4%. 4%. That was barely enough to keep a fire burning, let alone a complex biological organism functioning at high exertion levels. Her oxygen saturation had stabilized at 88%. Her heart rate was elevated but steady, and according to the biometric data, her body had started doing something the medical computer labeled as metabolic shifting. Whatever that meant. She's not going to quit, Koth said quietly. Vrel, I don't think she's going to quit. Vrel checked his credit balance and felt something uncomfortably close to panic. The summit push was 5 kilometers of concentrated suffering, and Jade Reeves was at kilometer 4.2, with absolutely no business still being conscious, let alone moving. The observation deck had gone from mockery to silence to something approaching religious awe. Cadets who'd started watching as a joke were now pressed against the viewing windows, their various appendages gripping railings, their optical organs wide and unblinking. The comm channels had gone from casual chatter to terse, clinical updates as every instructor with access to a monitor tried to understand what they were witnessing. Oxygen level at her position, 2.8%, the medical tech reported, and her voice had taken on a hollow quality, like she was reading death notifications. That's incompatible with sustained consciousness for 97% of known spacefaring species. Rel's datapad showed Jade's vitals in merciless detail. Oxygen saturation, 84%. Heart rate, 153. Respiratory rate, 42 breaths per minute. Every single number was screaming that she should be flat on her back, brain shutting down, body giving up. She was climbing a near vertical rock face. How is she gripping the holds? Koth asked, his 3 eyes tracking her progress. Her fingers, look at her fingers on the thermal scan. They should be numb. Useless. The temperature is minus 23 degrees. She's been exposed for over an hour, and she's executing technical climbing maneuvers that require precise motor control. I don't know, Vrel admitted, and those 3 words felt like swallowing broken glass. I don't know, and I've been training soldiers for 22 years. Jade pulled herself over a ledge, and for a moment she just lay there, flat on the frozen ground, chest heaving with efforts that looked painful even from orbit. The medical team's proximity sensors started blaring warnings. Instructor Ralax's voice crackled over comm, urgent and concerned. "She's down. Human is down at the 4.3-kilometer mark. Initiating extraction protocol." "Belay that," came a voice, and it took Vrel a second to realize it was his own. "She hasn't triggered her emergency beacon, Commander. She's clearly in distress. She has an emergency beacon. If she wants extraction, she'll activate it. Until then we observe." The seconds crawled by like wounded animals. 5 seconds. 10. 15. The entire observation deck was holding their collective breath, which was ironic considering the human on the screen was barely managing to breathe at all. Then Jade moved. First her hand, fingers splayed against the ice, then her arm, pushing her torso up, then her legs, drawing underneath her in a movement that looked like it cost her every molecule of energy she had left. She stood up, swayed, caught herself, took one step forward, then another. "She's moving again," the medical tech whispered, like speaking too loud might break whatever impossible thing was happening. "Oxygen saturation, 83%. Commander, that's critically low. That's organ damage territory." "I can read the numbers," Rel said, but he couldn't look away from the screen. The final kilometer was a mixture of obstacles that had been designed by sadists with engineering degrees. Cargo net climbs, balance beams. A tunnel section that required crawling through spaces barely large enough for a body, and all of it at 2.5% oxygen, which was less than what you'd find in a sealed cargo bay that had been venting atmosphere for an hour. Jade hit the cargo net and started climbing. Her movements had lost all grace now, all efficiency. She was just hauling herself upward through sheer force of will, each grip looking like it might be her last, each pull of her arms visibly shaking with effort. "She's crying," Koth said suddenly. Rel zoomed in on her face. Sure enough, tears were streaming down her cheeks, freezing in tracks along her skin. But her jaw was set, her eyes were open, and she was still climbing. A Valtine cadet in the observation deck spoke, his voice reverent. "I've failed this course. Twice. I have 3 times her lung capacity, and I failed. What is The balance beam section nearly ended it. Jade stepped onto the narrow surface, swayed dangerously, and for a heart-stopping moment it looked like she was going to fall. The safety systems would catch her, sure, but that would trigger an automatic course failure. She didn't fall. She took another step, and another. Her arms were out for balance. Her legs were trembling so badly the motion sensors were registering it as seismic activity, and her oxygen saturation had dropped to 82%, but she made it across. The tunnel was the last obstacle before the final sprint to the finish line. It was 60 meters long, barely tall enough to crawl through, and the oxygen inside was a flat 2.5%. Cadets had hallucinated in that tunnel. Some had panicked. One had completely lost consciousness and had to be dragged out by emergency responders. Jade dropped to her hands and knees and crawled inside. The biometric sensors tracked her progress in painful increments. 10 meters, 20, 30. Her heart rate was redlining at 168. Her respiratory rate had gone erratic, gasping breaths that weren't pulling in enough oxygen because there wasn't enough oxygen to pull. 40 meters. 50. Come on, Koth whispered, and Vrel realized his senior trainer wasn't the only one. Around the observation deck, aliens from a dozen different species were leaning forward, mandibles clicking, tendrils twitching, all of them silently willing this impossible human to just keep moving. 60 meters. Jade emerged from the tunnel and collapsed onto the ground. The finish line was 100 meters away. For 37 seconds, Jade Reeves didn't move. She just lay there on the frozen ground, her body a small, broken-looking shape on the thermal imaging, and Vrel had his hand actually on the extraction button this time, ready to call it. Then she pushed herself up onto her hands and knees. "No," Vrel breathed. "No, that's not possible." But possible or not, Jade was crawling. Actually crawling toward the finish line like some kind of relentless, oxygen-deprived machine that someone had forgotten to program with the concept of giving up. 20 meters. Her hands were leaving small traces of blood on the ice from torn skin. 40 meters. Her breathing was making a sound the audio pickups registered as wheezing, which the medical database flagged with 17 different critical warnings. 60 meters. She tried to stand, made it halfway up, and fell back to her knees. Stayed there for a moment. Stood up anyway. 80 meters. She was walking now, if you could call it that. More like controlled falling forward. Each step looking like it might be the one where gravity finally won. 90 meters. The observation deck had gone so quiet that Vrel could hear his own scales rasping against each other. Every eye, every sensor, every living being was focused on those final 10 meters. Jade took another step. Another. Her legs gave out completely 5 meters from the line, and she went down hard enough that the impact sensors registered it. She crawled the rest of the way. Her hand, shaking and pale and definitely showing signs of frostbite, crossed the finish line at exactly 917 minutes and 42 seconds from when she'd started. For exactly 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the observation deck absolutely erupted. Vrel's datapad slipped from his hands and clattered to the floor. Koth was making a sound that the translator couldn't even process, just labeled as intense emotional vocalization. Cadets were cheering, roaring, whistling, making whatever noises their species made when witnessing something that rewrote their understanding of what was possible. "Medical team to the finish line now!" Vrel shouted over the chaos, finally remembering that he was supposed to be in charge of something. The emergency response team reached Jade in 40 seconds flat. They surrounded her with equipment, oxygen masks, thermal blankets, scanners beeping frantically as they cataloged the damage. Oxygen saturation, 79%, the lead medic reported, his voice professionally calm in a way that suggested he was screaming internally. Core temperature, 34.6 degrees. Moderate hypothermia. Severe dehydration. Muscular trauma consistent with extreme exertion. Early-stage frostbite on extremities. And somehow, impossibly, no permanent organ damage detected. They'd gotten an oxygen mask on her face, and Vrel watched her saturation numbers climb back up. 80%, 85, 90. The color was returning to her face in blotches, and her eyes, which had been glazed and unfocused, were sharpening. The medic leaned close, asking her something. Jade's response came through the comm system, her voice wrecked and rasping but unmistakably smug. "Did I pass?" The observation deck lost its collective mind all over again. Koth turned to Vrel, his 3 eyes blinking in that sequence that meant he was trying very hard not to laugh. "So, about that bet." Vrel just stared at his empty hands where his datapad had been, where his certainty had been, where his understanding of human limitations had been roughly 5 minutes ago. "I need to sit down," he said quietly. "You are sitting down. Then I need to sit down more." The medical bay had been designed to accommodate 12 different species comfortably, which meant it was currently holding about 40 beings uncomfortably, all of them crammed in to see the human who had just completed the suffocator, without supplemental oxygen. Jade sat on the examination table, wrapped in thermal blankets that made her look like some kind of bizarre cocoon, an oxygen line running to her nose as a precaution, and an IV drip replacing the fluid she'd sweated out over nearly 3.5 hours of biological impossibility. Her fingers were bandaged, her feet were elevated, and she was eating something from a ration pack with the kind of focus that suggested she might actually be hungrier than she'd been oxygen deprived. Vrel stood at the front of the crowd, his pride somewhere in the recycling unit along with his 1,000 credits, trying to figure out how to ask the question everyone was thinking without sounding like a complete idiot. He settled for the direct approach. "How?" Jade looked up from her food, swallowed, and took a sip of water before answering. "How what? How are you alive? How did you complete a course designed for species with triple your lung capacity? How is your brain still functioning after spending over an hour at oxygen levels that should have caused irreversible neural damage?" Rel's voice was climbing despite his best efforts. "How did you do any of that?" She considered the question for a moment, her face thoughtful. "You want the short version or the long version? Any version that makes sense would be appreciated." "Okay, so, humans are persistence hunters. Or we were, back before we invented projectile weapons and grocery stores." Jade shifted on the table, wincing slightly. "Our ancestors on Earth, they didn't have claws or venom or armored hides. What they had was the ability to just keep going when everything else stopped." The Krathari instructor pushed forward. "That's not an explanation. That's a description of stubbornness." "Yeah, well, stubbornness got encoded into our DNA over a few million years." Jade held up one bandaged hand. "Humans used to hunt by literally chasing animals until they collapsed from heat exhaustion. Antelope, deer, whatever, we'd track them for hours, sometimes days, under the African sun in temperatures that would cook most species. The prey was faster, sure, but we didn't have to be fast. He just had to be relentless. Koth's 3 eyes narrowed in sequence, and the oxygen deprivation, that has nothing to do with running in heat. Doesn't it though? Jade took another drink. Think about it. Extreme exertion, minimal resources, body operating at the edge of failure. That's just Tuesday for baseline human biology. Our bodies are stupidly efficient at oxygen distribution when we need to be. We can shut down non-essential functions, redirect blood flow, increase our breathing rate to compensate for lower oxygen availability. It's not comfortable, trust me, but it's possible. The medical officer who'd been monitoring her vitals spoke up, his voice clinical. Her hemoglobin levels are significantly higher than baseline human averages. She's been training at altitude. Yeah, I spent 6 months in the mountains back home, conditioning at 4,000 meters. Jade grinned, though it looked exhausted. Figured if I was going to embarrass myself in front of the entire Galactic Military Academy, I should at least put in the prep work first. Vrel felt something click into place in his understanding. You knew this course was designed to be nearly impossible, and you trained specifically to break it. I read the manual, Commander. All 2,000 pages, remember? I knew exactly what I was signing up for. She met his eyes, and there was something in her gaze that made his scales ripple uncomfortably. Humans have been told we don't belong in a lot of places throughout our history. We're too weak, too fragile, too dependent on our specific environmental conditions. And you know what we do every single time someone tells us that. What? Koth asked quietly. We show up anyway. We adapt. We push through. And we prove that fragile doesn't mean breakable. Jade gestured at the medical equipment surrounding her. Yeah, I need oxygen. I need water. I need food and sleep, and a whole bunch of things to keep functioning. But needing those things doesn't make me weak. It just means I have to be smarter, tougher, and more determined than the beings who don't. The room had gone very quiet again. But this time it wasn't the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of people, beings, whatever, having their fundamental assumptions challenged and not quite knowing how to respond. A Valthine cadet at the back, the same one who'd mocked Jade before the course, spoke up hesitantly. I failed that course 3 times. I have physiological advantages you'll never have, and I still couldn't do it. Jade's expression softened slightly. Yeah, but you'll try again, right? That's the thing. It's not about having advantages, it's about what you do with what you've got. 3 days later, Vrel stood in his office, methodically transferring 1,000 credits from his account to Koth's, each transaction confirmation, feeling like a personal attack on his judgment. Koth, to his credit, wasn't gloating much. You know what the worst part is? Vrel said, finalizing the last transfer. I've already received 17 requests from other instructors wanting humans assigned to their advanced programs. 17. The species I said would wash out in 10 minutes is now the most requested demographic for high-difficulty training courses. Supply and demand, Commander. You can't buy that kind of advertising. Koth pulled up a holographic display showing social feeds from across the Academy network. She's trending on 6 different platforms. They're calling her the Oxygen Thief. Apparently, it's meant as a compliment. Vrel scrolled through the posts. Videos of Jade's course completion had been viewed over 2 million times. There were analysis breakdowns from xenobiology experts trying to explain human endurance capabilities. There was even fan art, which seemed excessive. But what did he know about cadet culture? I Command sent a message this morning, Koth continued, looking far too amused. They want to know if we have capacity to train more humans in extreme environment protocols. Apparently, there's some interest in forming specialized units of beings who need to breathe constantly and can be killed by simply holding their head underwater for a few minutes. Yes, that sounds tactically brilliant. Specialized units of beings who will absolutely, definitively refuse to quit no matter how bad things get, Koth corrected. That's a different kind of tactical advantage. Vrel's scales did that rippling thing again. He pulled up Jade's file, looking at the updated notes. Course completion time, 2 hours, 17 minutes, 42 seconds. No supplemental oxygen used. No emergency extractions required. Performance rating, exceptional, recommended for advanced operations training. At the bottom, someone had added a new notation to her official record. Species, human. Physiological classification, improbably resilient. Threat assessment, do not underestimate, under any circumstances. You know what I'm putting in my next training manual? Vrel said, closing the file. A whole new section. Chapter 12, Understanding Human Limitations, with a subsection titled, Apparently They Don't Have Any. We checked. Koth's laughter followed him out of the office. Down in the training facility, Jade Reeves was suiting up for the underwater endurance course, surrounded by a group of Icarian cadets